One of the themes that I've talked about in a number of my videos and written about as well over the last couple of years, especially since this war started after October 7th, is the problem of lack of conviction by people in the West to see good and evil clearly, to have the conviction that they are on the side of good, that we are on the side of good, and it is our responsibility to destroy evil, a conviction that we saw in earlier generations. And I recently saw a clip. I just saw a clip of Dennis Prager being interviewed by Abigail Shrier, the author Abigail Shrier, and he was talking about morality. He wasn't talking about the war per se, but he said some things that gave me some clarity. So I want to play you this clip, and then I'll share my thoughts. I think there's something very important here in what Dennis Prager has to say. So here's Dennis.
New book, If There Is No God, with a provocation you've presented to hundreds or thousands of high school students over the years. Your beloved dog and a stranger are drowning. Who do you save first? You've asked them. And you say typically that 2/3 of the kids, high school kids, vote against the stranger. Roughly 1/3 say the dog, 1/3 say the stranger, and 1/3 typically say they don't know. And when you ask high school kids, why would you let a human being drown? The response is very consistent. They say, I love my dog. I don't love the stranger. And I'm wondering, where have you seen in our own time feelings-based morality predominate on an important moral question?
I can give you an almost infinite number of examples, but here's one. Before Tucker Carlson became somewhat notorious for his views on Jews in Israel, I wrote a column, so there's proof that I did this years ago, criticizing him for his position that anyone who defended the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atom bombs over Japan is evil. That was his word. You're evil if you defended them, because killing innocents is always wrong. So no matter how many innocents' lives were saved because it ended the war, was irrelevant. He felt for the innocents who were killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's a perfect example of not thinking through a moral issue and having your emotions dominate your thinking. But it happens all the time. Young people especially. By the way, I should note, when you note that I've asked this of predominantly high school students, I've also done it with college students, but mostly high school. I've done this over 50 years. So the high school students of 50 years ago are now in their late 60s. And it doesn't matter, I would get the same results.
Wow.
That's the important thing to note. The only difference is, when I first started asking this, I've told this to very few people. You'll get a kick out of this, Abigail.
Yes.
When I first started reporting, for example, I would be scholar in residence at some, let's say, synagogue, later, even more so, churches, but in the beginning, synagogues. So I would then report, I just want you to know that 2/3 of your children here at the synagogue or at this day school would not save the stranger first. They either don't know or they would resolutely vote for the dog they love. All the time, someone would get up and say, Mr. Prager, or I was so young, Dennis, they would say, I don't believe you. I don't believe that 2/3 of our kids would not vote for the stranger. Now, no parents ever object to my saying that. They're proud of their kids. They're the former high school students, now parents. So there's no constituency for the stranger. And of course, the answer is, if you don't believe in God, and I'm not even arguing that God exists, I'm just saying, if you don't believe in God, then you don't believe that the human being is created in God's image, obviously. And that's what gives us our biblical basis for the unique value of the human being. Animals are not created in God's image.
You know, I'm wondering, in the last 18 months, there have been some very strange, and from my point of view, and I think yours, incredibly unhealthy developments on the American right. And I can tell you that I personally have had the thought so many times over the last 18 months, gosh, we really need Dennis Prager back to full strength right away. And of course, wishing and praying for your very speedy and full recovery as quickly as possible. And examples of these unhealthy developments on the American right would include assertions that American Jews are all Israel first, that Israel was somehow involved in the murder of Charlie Kirk, that American support for Israel is being elicited by blackmail over Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, that today's Jews aren't the real Jews of the Bible, as Tucker Carlson recently suggested. And of course, Tucker Carlson's most recent claim to his millions of viewers that Chabad, the Hasidic movement within Orthodox Judaism, was somehow involved in America's decision to strike Iran. And I wanted to know what appears to be happening from your point of view. These are not ideas we saw emanating from mainstream voices on the American right for generations, if ever. What is going on?
Nobody knows the answer. What animates Tucker Carlson to have this? If anybody has Jew first or Israel first, it's he and Candace Owens. They're the first people they blame for whatever happens, including Charlie Kirk's murder, for example.
You know, what's interesting is that the, Tucker Candace worldview that you've been describing is so dark. It's so damning of America. And I wonder, what is the antidote to its growing popularity in this country? What do we do?
Oh, the antidote is courage. It's always the antidote to what is bad. People have to come out and say they're advocating bad, indeed evil ideas. When given another example is Candace Owens in her very long dialogue with Tucker Carlson said near the end that Israel is the demonic country. In other words, it's the most evil country on earth, that she will never support it, and so on. I mean, these are incredible statements. Israel is one of the most decent societies in the world. The accusation that it's an apartheid state and committing genocide, these are libels. They're not true. There are more Palestinians, there are 5 times as many Palestinians today as there were when Israel was founded. That's not an effective genocide.
Okay. That's the clip. So I found this to be very thought-provoking. You know, the way he talks about the moral decay or the lack of value for humanity, and then he connected it with Tucker Carlson and what Tucker said about Hiroshima. It made me think of another thing that Tucker said recently, and I think that they're connected. I think they're coming from the same set of values. Before we get on with that, just want to remind everyone that we are in a war with Iran, and there are missiles flying at Israel, and there's a lot of stresses on the ground for a lot of families across Israel for a whole variety of reasons. And Israel 365 has stepped up, and we're raising funds and distributing them where needed for a whole range of issues. So please go to Israel365charity.com and click on the Israel Under Fire banner, or scroll down to the current projects and click on the Israel at War project. And you can contribute there, and it's a great way to participate in strengthening Israel's home front. So the other quote that I'm talking about is just a piece of the speech that Tucker Carlson gave at America Fest this past December. I was in the room at the time. It was an interesting moment. But take a look at what he says here. Now, let me just introduce it. What he was talking about is that his brother, Tucker's brother, Buckley, is even more rabidly anti-Israel and anti-Jewish than Tucker is. And he says some outrageous things online. And Tucker is talking about that.
I remember my brother once said, I have one brother who's my best friend, and he once said something lunatic, as brothers do. And I remember all these reporters, one from the Washington Post, which used to be a newspaper in Washington, calling me and being like, "Will you denounce your brother?" I said, "Son, if my brother went on a drug-related murder spree, I would not denounce him." "What? Are you for drug-related murder sprees?" "No, I'm for my brother. And nothing will ever make me not for my brother." Now, I'd probably tell him, "No more drug-related murder sprees for you." I'm not for that. I'm not for a lot of things, actually. But I will never, ever denounce people I love to satisfy the mob.
Okay. So this was a very interesting moment in his speech because, I mean, first of all, the crowd was not with him, which was very interesting. There were not a lot of applause during his speech, and at that moment, there were a lot of people who were sort of like quizzically looking at each other, going like, "If my brother went on a drug-related murder spree, I'd turn him in. Of course, I'd denounce him. He's a murderer." And that's actually a biblical value. You see that in the book of Exodus, where at the sin of the golden calf, where Moses, comes down and he sees what's happening, and he actually says, "Whoever is for God, come with me," and the Levites join him, and he says to whoever stepped forward that you have to now go basically exact punishment on everyone, and he even specifically says, and people should even if it's your family members, and regardless of the commentary on that particular scene in the book of Exodus, the point here is that there has to be a moral compass where good and evil is the ultimate value, which brings me to another connection that I think this has everything to do with what Dennis was talking about. And it's this poll that I've been thinking about since I saw it about a month before the war with Iran broke out. Take a look at this poll. It was a poll conducted by Breitbart, exclusive poll. Americans want to topple Iranian regime, but unwilling to risk even a single American life to do so. And it talks about how there was overwhelming support for the toppling of the Iranian regime. And the stunning new data shows that yes, Americans do not like the regime in Iran and would love to see it wiped out. But look what it says here. And it talks about how the numbers are actually quite high for the toppling of the regime among Republicans. It was 60%. Okay, look what it says here. While that seems strong on both accounts, among Americans broadly and among Republicans specifically, it's in the follow-up questioning where things get dicey. Almost everyone who supports the U.S. toppling the Iranian regime only does so if 0 American lives are at risk in so doing. When asked how many American fatalities are an acceptable number to stomach for the U.S. to topple the regime in Tehran, a majority of all Americans, and specifically Republicans, said 0. Among all Americans and among Republicans, specifically 51% of each group said they would tolerate no American casualties to achieve the mission. Now, why is this so fascinating? And I find it absolutely fascinating because they believe that it is a moral good to destroy the Iranian regime, to bring it down, overwhelmingly. But equally overwhelmingly, they're not willing to even suffer a single casualty to do so. What does this mean? What does this mean? So I really believe that it's directly connected with what Dennis was saying about that thought experiment about your beloved dog and a complete stranger, which is that I'm unwilling to sacrifice anything for something that is a higher good. Because saving a human life is obviously a higher good than saving your dog. It's obviously a higher good because human life is more valuable than dog life. But if it means that I'm sacrificing my dog to save a human life, I'm unwilling to do so. You see what I'm saying? It's actually the same type of thinking. My brother goes on a drug-related spree, and justice must be done when someone goes on a drug-related killing spree. Society demands it, but if it requires me to make a sacrifice of something that I care about, I'm unwilling to do so. I want the Iranian regime to fall, but if it means that I have to sacrifice anything, if there has to be any sacrifice on our part, I'm unwilling to do so. Imagine if the Americans felt that way in World War II about the regime in Nazi Germany. Now, people throughout the centuries, good people have understood that to bring about good in the world and to defeat evil requires sacrifice on our parts. And that's part of having a strong sense of ethics and morality that's based in faith in higher values, in what is most important, and that what is most important, what is of the highest value. That's what we say when we talk about believing in God. Yes, we believe that there's a God, but it's that God has put before us a set of values and a way to live, and that it's more important than our own lives. That's why people are willing to die for great causes. The logical extension of the Tucker Carlson view of the world as laid out in that speech and in that example of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that Dennis Prager put forward is that you're not willing to die for anything. Because why would you sacrifice anything that is important to you for any higher good? So I think that there's something very important here in understanding the depth of the moral decay. And also, let me highlight this. Let me focus in. Dennis said something fascinating there when he talked about the answer he gets from the kids, but then he said that the answer from the parents has changed over the years, right? That the parents of today are proud of their children that they would choose the dog first, or that they simply don't raise any objection to their children choosing the dog first. And what that means is that one of the correctives, one of the correcting mechanisms that's supposed to exist in society of the older generation being wiser and being able to transmit correct values to the younger generation is no longer there. It's no longer there. And maybe that speaks to the lack of conviction in general about staring evil down. This moral relativism, which has become a big problem on the world stage, on the diplomatic stage, is seeing evil regimes, evil despotic regimes that persecute and murder their own people as legitimate governments, is a lack of moral clarity. It's a lack of seeing good and evil and understanding which side you're on and having the conviction to say that you're on the side of good and that it is your responsibility to the death to defeat evil in the world. It's very sad to see. And I say this also as someone, I live in Israel, and in Israel there is a clear understanding. We mourn terribly, we cry terribly for every loss on the battlefield. But there is almost universal conviction among the people of the state of Israel, among the Israeli people, that it requires sacrifices to defeat evil. And that we knowingly, clear-eyed, we know that we're going to make those sacrifices, but that there's a higher good that we're fighting for. And it's that exact lack of clarity that is infecting the Western world. And let me add, the lack of family formation, the low birth rates in the Western world are coming from the same place, because having children is a financial burden. It makes your life less comfortable. It makes things more difficult in a lot of ways. And why bring that inconvenience on yourself? Right? In the old world, long before, centuries ago, having kids was an economic benefit. You'd have more workers on your farm. You'd have people to take care of you when you got older, because there was no social security or pension system. Nowadays, it makes me more uncomfortable. So the entire inclination of the human condition right now goes much deeper than the examples of like a crisis moment, like your dog is drowning. But the entire orientation of people to their moral, to society and to themselves and to what's worth sacrificing for, even if it's a minor sacrifice, is so focused on what makes me comfortable and what I care about on the most basic, most basic human level, but not higher values. Why should I make myself uncomfortable? Why should I disrupt my life to do so? Why should I incur those expenses? I think that that's subconsciously part of this, part of the problem of the decline of Western civilization. I think there's a lot in this conversation. I think I've just touched the tip of the iceberg. I hope you found this interesting. Please drop a comment. Let me know what you think. I think this is an important conversation to have, and I'm happy we're having it. And I try to read as many of the comments as I can, and I greatly appreciate all your help in helping grow this channel. Please like and share and subscribe and all that great stuff. May God bless you.